This episode is brought to you by Charles Schwab. Schwab's passion for serving clients is more than just standard practice. It's part of who they are. With transparent pricing, 24/7 live support, and a satisfaction guarantee, the people at Schwab go the extra mile to help you on your investing journey. They are not just financial people. They're people too. Learn more at schwab.com/whyschwab. This week, if you were looking at headlines, trying to figure out what exactly is happening in Iran, you would keep coming across one story in particular, again and again, the story that the so-called morality police were being abolished. Maybe.
What do we know about the morality police? Have they been disbanded?
Not at all. To be honest,
I started getting push notifications about this story at 10 a.m. on Sunday. And reporters were trying to clean up the mess they left behind for days.
Now U.S. officials believe the regime may be signaling they will shut down the morality police as a way to preempt a planned 3-day strike as the economy crumbles.
How quickly were you frustrated by the coverage of this story? Was it like right away?
I try not to get into my personal opinions, but I will say I raised the flag quite quickly internally. And so we actually did not lead with that headline.
Nahayat Tizhoosh is an Iranian journalist at the CBC, the Canadian broadcasting company. She was not supposed to be working when this story broke, but she weighed in anyway to warn her bosses that the morality police probably were not going anywhere anytime soon. Nahayat has been keeping her eyes on the protest movement in Iran since it ramped up this September. It started with the death of a young woman who'd been detained. Apparently, she was wearing her hijab wrong. In the weeks and months since, Nahayat says, frustration has snowballed in ways that are hard for an outsider to see or understand. And the misunderstanding this weekend reflects that. It started when the Attorney General of Iran made some comments suggesting that the morality police, the same people who detained Mahsa Amini, the woman who died, had been abolished. But in the same breath, the Attorney General admitted this police force was not part of his jurisdiction.
Since then, a few regime officials and parliamentarians have come out and again have given conflicting information, leading certain, people, activists, the U.S. State Department to say, listen, we just don't have enough information to even definitively say that the morality police has been disbanded or abolished.
It sounds confusing. And it also sounds like the main people who benefit from that confusion are people inside the government of Iran.
That's the allegation, right? That's the allegation by a lot of activists, a lot of Iranians who, as soon as that news was, spread, were sort of saying, guys, hold on, wait a minute. This is the regime's MO. You have to also remember in the context of what was happening. So it was quite literally on the eve of 3-day national strikes, right, happening in Iran. And so a lot of activists who I have spoken with have told me, this is disinformation to either give the impression that something is changing inside the regime, that, these protests are having some sort of impact, and just simply to distract.
Nahayat says if the government wants to distract people, it's because something major is shifting in this country.
Well, I think we're seeing an unprecedented movement in Iran. So all this week, there's been strikes across the country. So there's videos, images of, stores being completely shut down. And dozens of cities across Iran are participating.
And are people still being arrested and threatened by the government?
Yes, absolutely.
Today on the show, Nahayat is going to tell the story of one of these people, a protester whose arrest is shaking the foundations of this nascent movement. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This episode of What Next is brought to you by Season 3 of The Relentless, a podcast from Slate Studios and Century 21 Real Estate. If you're an entrepreneur, you know just how challenging it can be to run a business. It can feel like there are insurmountable hurdles at every turn. So, How can he cut through the noise and use those obstacles as fuel for new opportunities? This season of The Relentless teaches you how to move fearlessly. Join author, entrepreneur, and returning host Kristen Meinzer as she talks to everyone from athletes to CEOs who share how they have used strength and motivation to find success in the face of adversity. Be sure to check out the first episode, where you'll learn how venture capitalist and author Catherine Finney became one of the first Black women to have a successful 7-figure startup exit. Whether you work in sales or are simply interested in what it takes to transform fear into inspiration, The Relentless will inspire you to take that leap and move fearlessly. Season 3 of The Relentless is out now. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Part of what Nahayat Tizhoosh finds frustrating about covering the protests in Iran is that, like a lot of Western journalists, she finds it difficult to know exactly what's going on in the country, day to day. She wanted to tell the story of one person caught up in this moment of change. And that's how she found herself drawn to an Iranian rapper named Toomaj Salehi. She followed him online, knew he was vocal politically. He'd even been detained before for some particularly stinging lyrics. Oh, and she loved his flow. You
know, some stuff might get lost in translation, but I would say he's an OG rapper. There's no auto-tune. There's nothing. It's just him, and he spits fast. And his lyrics bite, if I can say it that way. They really bite. Personally, I've listened to him for many years.
Who sent you his music?
My mom. I was in the car with my mother, and she was listening to rap music. And I was like, Mom, what are you listening to? And she was like, this is a guy who raps.
Why was your mom into him?
Well, this is the interesting part. I think a lot of people, when they first hear his music, they don't even think that he's somebody who's inside the country, because his message is so forceful and so quite aimed at the regime and critical of the regime in a country where any sentence, any word of dissent can really land you in jail, and then God knows what will happen to you.
That willingness to take on the Iranian government, it is part of Toomaj Salehi's appeal, not just for expats like Nahayat and her mom, but for people inside Iran, too. Back in 2021, Toomaj released a song he's become known for ever since. In English, it translates to mouse hole. It called out not just the Islamic Republic, but all the people who uphold Iran's ruling elite, even passively.
So Surah Mush, mouse hole, as you said in English, is actually a song that I think really was a thorn in the side of the Islamic Republic, which landed him in jail, not the first time because he had been arrested before, but in 2021. So in that song, he essentially sort of challenges, I would say, not just people in the regime, but people who have propped up the regime, in his words, to find a mouse hole to hide in because the end of their days are coming.
Like, he talks about celebrities that, play both sides of the fence a little bit.
Exactly. So he has one particular quote, in that song, Surah Mush, if you saw people's pain and you turned a blind eye, if you cheated out of fear or self-interest, you too are a partner in crime of the tyrant. You too are a criminal. Sort of to this point that he makes continuously, that if you look the other way, if you don't, see what's happening and even vocalize that you don't agree with what the regime is doing, you are part of this apparatus. You're a part of this regime's oppression of the Iranian people.
Do you have any sense of how Toomaj became the person he is right now? Because it seems very atypical to me that someone, first of all, becomes an artist. That's pretty hard. But second of all, uses their art to do something so political, so anti-government. How did he do all of those things?
So we know a little bit about him. What I do know from his uncle, who has said on record that Toomaj's mother herself died when Toomaj was younger, and she apparently was a political prisoner herself, or she was political. And it's clear that he doesn't come from, let's call it the upper class economically. He comes from a working class family, regular, just simple family life. He was aware and felt what the most vulnerable in society felt and feel inside Iran. Because it's easy to be disconnected from political realities or perhaps, political resistance when you are affluent, let's say.
After releasing Mousehole, Toomaj was arrested and then released by Iranian authorities. But it meant that when protests started up in earnest this fall, he was a target. That didn't stop him from posting support for the uprising on Twitter and Instagram. He released music, too, like this song, Battlefield. His lyrics say, "It's time to attack the enemy without fear. And don't call us rebels. We came for a revolution." So when protests broke out in the last few months, did you immediately think, I wonder what Toomaj Salehi is saying about all this?
Yeah. That was pretty much my first thought because, as journalists, we're always looking to get as close as possible to a story, right? And so the challenge with Iran being that reliable media is simply not present inside Iran. If you notice, everyone is reporting from outside of Iran. So in a quest to sort of get as close as possible, and somebody who has been outspoken for years and years, I just thought he'd be amazing to speak with.
What happened when you reached out?
I personally didn't even think he would respond to me. I reached out to him on Instagram and I sent him a note and I said, here's my, work experience. If you want to look at my bylines, this is who I am. I would love to speak with you about what's happening in Iran. And he responded immediately. And the only question he asked me was whether or not our broadcaster publishes in Farsi or broadcasts in Farsi, in Persian.
Was that for his safety?
I mean, listen, he clearly, and he told me himself, at this stage, he didn't care about his safety. But I think he was very aware of what it would mean for Western media to just give people a sense of what's happening inside Iran, and that it could be much more powerful, perhaps, than just speaking to a media that is targeted to a Persian-speaking audience, right? To get his message out to an English-speaking audience, for people to get a sense of what's happening. So I think that may have been some of the reason, because I did ask him, I said, do you want to switch our conversation over to perhaps Signal and to be safer, just as you said? And he said, no, safety at this stage doesn't really matter. They monitor my phones anyway. So from the get-go, I said, okay, this guy is either crazy or just fearless.
Yeah. I'm glad you talk about how he was clearly very thoughtful about who would be seeing him and how they saw him. Because one of the things that stood out when I watched your interview with him was that he could be anywhere when he did this interview. He has a beautiful white background, pictures of Iranian people behind him. I wondered if they were maybe people who'd been arrested or something else.
They are. And that was actually his suggestion. He was sending me pictures and he said, I'm making this as the background for the interview. And if you look on the left side, it's people including Mahsa Amini, who were killed in this uprising. And on the other side, it's people like Hossein Ronaqi, who is an incredible journalist and writer inside Iran, who until recently was also jailed and tortured. He's since been released. So this is something that goes to Toomaj's character. He's extremely humble, and the people are always first. He doesn't see himself as anything unique, which is probably a bit confusing to people who listen to his story, but he sort of always puts Iranian people in the foreground.
Yeah. He really plainly lays out Like, here's why the West knows so little about what's happening in Iran. Like, we're not bringing our cell phones to protests, so we can't be tracked. And so what you're seeing is just what gets out. And like, there are so many restrictions on that because people aren't bringing devices to record. And then people can't get the videos out of the country because of the internet restrictions. And so you realize it's like this huge funnel, like so much is happening, but you're only seeing the tiniest amount.
Yeah, that we're just simply not seeing, Mary. And that's what he was saying. You know, there are crimes happening in parts of Iran that we might never find out about because videos are simply not getting out. He talks about how, you know, when you take a phone, those who are brave enough to even take their cell phone to protest, and just the action of aiming up your phone and recording what, you know, the regime agents and forces are doing puts you in the line of fire. Quite frankly, there is a video of one woman in particular who was recording a video while she was chanting, "Don't be afraid," and she was shot that very second, and it's captured on video. So it really goes to show you that the people who are protesting on the street, not only are they risking their lives as they're protesting, but they're also risking more so their lives by filming what is happening to them and to their compatriots. So it's and Toomaj was very aware of that, and he really wanted to sort of bring that across.
How did you find out that Toomaj had been arrested?
Well, that was a crazy day in itself because our story, we had been working on getting the story out. We had to translate clips, and it was quite a long piece. I wanted to do it justice. And so it took about a week and a half or so to even get the story ready. And so the day the story was supposed to actually go out, the day that the interview clips were meant to air or be published, was the same day I found out about Toomaj's arrest. An hour before our story was meant to go live, I found out that he was essentially abducted by regime forces from the southwestern region of Iran, where he had sort of been trying to avoid the regime.
Huh. Did you worry that your interview was part of the reason he was arrested?
You know, I did have a quick thought about it, but I brushed that aside just because I really got a sense of who he is. I think in the interview, he, no matter what happens to him, wanted his message and the people's message to be heard.
Do you think he knew he would be arrested for what he said?
He absolutely knew.
When we come back, Toomaj Salehi has been detained before, but this time, he faces the harshest consequences yet. This episode is brought to you by Schwab. Do you ever think about your money? Sure you do. You probably think about it all the time. But guess what? Your money's been thinking about you too. And it wants you to know that a financial plan can lead to 2.7 times higher net worth on average. That's why Schwab makes starting one easier than ever, with one-on-one guidance from a financial consultant and a complimentary online retirement plan that you can start in as little as 15 minutes. Plus, track your progress with free digital planning tools. So what are you waiting for? Visit schwab.com/plan today to learn more. This episode is brought to you by Best Buy. This year, let Best Buy be your holiday hype partner. Whether you're searching for exciting gifts or trying to snag the hottest holiday deals, or looking for ways to simplify the giving and receiving experience, Best Buy is here to help. Best Buy's got the best assortment of impactful tech gifts, along with fast and free fulfillment options and great deals all season long. Maybe you're looking for an air fryer to help the aspiring foodie in your life unlock new recipes, or perhaps a new phone or camera for an aspiring filmmaker who's turning their passion into a side hustle. Maybe you're on the hunt for a new smartwatch to support a friend's wellness journey. No matter what you're looking for, Best Buy is your gifting destination for everyone on your list. And Best Buy makes it easy to get your gifts how and when you need them with free next-day delivery on thousands of items, as well as same-day delivery and in-store pickup options. Shop great deals on gifts now at Best Buy. I know that you've been in touch with Toomaj's family and friends since his arrest. What do they know about where he is, how he is?
So if we start at the beginning, when he was first abducted, there was really no information about his whereabouts for, I think, 3 days. So no one knew where he had been taken or his condition or anything really about what they might be doing to him. And then the regime's broadcaster, one of the state news agencies on Twitter, on social media, posted a very, very short clip purportedly showing Toomaj in a blindfold. He looked like he was under duress, expressing regret for threatening the regime, essentially. And of course, it's the MO of the Islamic Republic. Forced confessions, they have a track record of doing that. Not just forced confessions, but airing them publicly. You know, they've since put out another video of him, and they're always very, very short. And they're always about his music or particular messages that have particularly resonated with Iranian people that they ask him, or force him, I should say, not ask him, to recant. So that in itself really tells you about perhaps the threat they see in someone like Toomaj. You look at videos and people are chanting for him to be freed inside Iran. And people go so far as to say, if one hair on the top of his head, is harmed, we will cause riots.
You say that some of these Iranian protesters have said things like, if you touch a hair on his head, we'll be in the streets. It sounds like the regime has done much more than touched a hair on his head. What do we know about how Toomaj has been treated in prison?
Yeah, so I've spoken with one source in particular who essentially gathered information from people who have left that jail in Isfahan that Toomaj is in. And there are sort of two things to update about him. We know from those reports that he's been severely tortured. There were initially reports of one of his legs being broken as a result of a gunshot wound, that his leg was in a cast, that his face had severely been damaged as a result of torture. And then the most recent reports from that source suggest that he is staying defiant inside the jail. On one occasion, at least, he started shouting out loud from inside the cell that he was in against the regime, and other cells reportedly joined in, other prisoners joined in, and sort of a bit of a riot started inside the jail, and forces quickly intervened and isolated Toomaj, according to these reports, and severely beat him, one report suggesting that they had the intent of killing him.
What are the charges against Toomaj? I think you've said he faces potentially the death penalty.
Yeah, the sources that I've spoken to essentially were quite worried because it appeared that he was going to be charged with muhareb, which means waging war against God, as well as corruption on earth. In Persian, it's mufsed fil arz. The charge of muhareb was left off his indictment, but that charge of corruption on earth, it still calls for the death sentence under Iran's Islamic Sharia law. So that is what he's facing, along with other charges. And that will likely be done in what's called a revolutionary court in Iran. These are specific courts that were set up after the Islamic Revolution in 1979 to deal with any political dissent, to squash that, essentially. Verdicts in these courts are reportedly decided before the trial even takes place. So there is no due process in these courts, just to be frank.
What you're laying out is pretty grim.
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder, what's the timeline here for all of this? Like here in the United States, it takes a long time for someone to go from charged with a crime, on trial. If they're death penalty, execution, it takes decades. I don't get the sense that's the case in Iran.
No, and it's also really difficult to know because there's no real, due process in these courts. And in Toomaj's case in particular, he is high profile. So his case, it will most likely be decided at the desk of somebody who works for the regime's security or intelligence apparatus. So, the family is in limbo. Those who love him are in limbo. It's not clear what's going to happen. And his team is sort of, it would be fair to say, trying to keep his name out there to keep up public pressure. Because we've seen in other cases of high-profile Iranians who were jailed, that public pressure sometimes does work in either getting visitation or even the release of prisoners on bail. His family has not been able to see him in 38 days, has not even spoken with him. And it's not clear what the intelligence or security apparatus of the regime will decide to do with him.
Yeah, I was struck by the fact that Toomaj's Twitter account is still tweeting. Like, it's still sending messages out. It's still tweaking the regime. And I guess what you're saying is that that's strategic, to just stay out there.
Toomaj was very, I can say he was selfless. He told me himself, he said, I'm always worried when I join these protests that if I get arrested, I'm not worried about myself. I'm worried that people will lose faith. And I think keeping his Instagram, his Twitter, his social media going is part of that, is part of keeping almost his voice alive, even when he's behind bars, to keep pushing people, to keep motivating people.
Do you think you'll ever speak to Toomaj again? Do you think about that?
I have thought about it. It's very difficult to predict, right? We don't know what will happen to him. I can perhaps only say that I hope we can speak again. And certainly the people around him are really doing everything possible to make sure that he comes out relatively unharmed in this case, meaning that he's not killed.
Nahayat, I'm really grateful for your time and your reporting and your dedication to this story. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary, for having me. I appreciate it.
Nahayat Tizhoosh is a producer at the CBC. And that's the show. If you're a fan of what we're doing here at What Next, the best way to show our bosses that you like what we're up to is to go on over to slate.com/whatnextplus and sign up for our membership program. It's known as Slate Plus. It comes with great benefits like all access to slate.com and ad-free podcasts like this one. Anyway, go find out more about it. That URL again is slate.com/whatnextplus. What Next is produced by Elena Schwartz, Carmel Delshad, and Madeline Ducharme. We are getting a ton of support right now from Anna Phillips, Jared Downing, Victoria Dominguez, and Sam Kim. We are led by Alicia Montgomery and Joanne Levine. I'm handing things off to the What Next TBD crew right now, but I will be back in this feed on Monday.
This episode is brought to you by Best Buy. Whether you're searching for exciting gifts or trying to snag the hottest holiday deals, Best Buy is here to help. From air fryers for the aspiring foodies in your life to smartwatches your fitness friends will love, Best Buy is your gifting destination for everyone on your list. Best Buy makes it easy to get your gifts how and when you need them with free next-day delivery on thousands of items, as well as same-day delivery and in-store pickup options. Shop great deals on gifts now at Best Buy.